Hey everyone, welcome to DF Direct Weekly number 82. It's here, it's happening. And this is actually the second time we have actually shot the beginning part of this show, owing to the arrival of what is, in effect, unprecedented behavior from NVIDIA. We usually shoot DF Direct Weekly on the morning of the Friday. By the afternoon, NVIDIA had actually unlaunched the controversial RTX 4080 12GB. So this direct is going to be a direct of two halves. Obviously, there's the new bit that we're shooting now, and then we're going to be moving on to the show that we shot last week. But we just couldn't not talk about this. So yes, joining me to talk about all of this stuff, first of all, John Linneman.
Deja vu, Rich. We're here again. It's so soon.
We are indeed. And of course, Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, there may be a couple glitches in the Matrix here. I think I have a different level of beard. I may even have a different shirt on. You know, this is how we run though at DF.
Yeah, you were actually wearing a rather fetching jumper / cardigan.
That's true. I was. That's around here somewhere.
So yeah, all continuity has just gone out of the window here. I've had a haircut, so things will look very different at the cut. That's because of editing and a haircut and Alex's jumper choice. But let's talk about the big news of the week, which is that NVIDIA has backtracked on the RTX 4080 12GB. A simple blog post, first of all, talking about, well, that they are unlaunching, which is a new word to me, the RTX 4080 12GB. They say it's a fantastic graphics card, but it's not named right. Having two GPUs with the 4080 designation is confusing, so we're pressing the unlaunch button on the 4080 12GB. The 4080 16GB is amazing and on track to delight gamers everywhere on November the 16th. So Alex, do you think that the 4080 12GB would not have delighted gamers everywhere?
No, it would not have. It would have also reviewed very poorly, I believe, based upon the preliminary benches that they also released. This is interesting. It's
yes.
There's the little information we have about the card never painted it in like a great picture of it. It didn't capture an audience, unlike the RTX 4090 did, pre-review and post-review. And I think the expectations concerning the mid-range of GPUs and the general state of the market meant that this 4080 12GB really never would have had a chance had it launched in the position it did. And I think that is reflected in our reactions to it. I remember when the RTX 4000 was launched and we did our DF Direct kind of before our DLSS 3 video even came out, we were saying like how the RTX 4090 looks really beastly and it's very interesting and it's hard to critique a Halo product. But that 4080 12GB, I don't think we had anything positive to say about it, really. So it's kind of where it's at. And I don't think it would have launched and reviewed well. I guess it's just a matter of what's going to be happening with it. What's going to be taking its place.
What do you think is going to be taking its place, John? I mean, these cards have been manufactured, right?
This card disappeared. Yeah, this card's coming out. It's just, I mean, in the part of the direct last week that we have now scrubbed and will never be seen by the public, I mean, I think many others would agree, but I kind of feel that 12 gig card is basically a 4070 or a 4070 Ti kind of product, right? You name it that, drop the price a little bit maybe, and then suddenly it's like, okay, that seems fine, right? Like that's where it seems to slot in. And I would not be surprised if that's actually what they're going to end up doing. And then, you know, the delay like this probably just has to take into account, you know, manufacturing costs. Oh, sorry, the manufacturing process. You know, if you had packaging, you had, you know, like the shroud for the card itself, all the cooling, everything would have had like 4080 branding on it, I'd assume, to some degree, right? You can't do that now, so they have to essentially stop all that. They have to have their product design team come back. They decide on the new name, decide on the new branding, have NVIDIA and all their board partners then have to do new packaging, which I assume will just modify their old packaging, you know, with the new name on it and everything. But it's gonna change all that stuff, and that stuff just takes time. And that's obviously why they have to delay it, because, you know, now they got to go back and fix that aspect. But the cards themselves, I think they will launch soon enough, and hopefully at a lower price point.
Yeah. Wow, I don't know where to begin with this one because there's so much to talk about here. First of all, yeah, John, I think you're right. I mean, those things would have been manufactured and they're ready to go. So now they need to be
Unlaunched.
yes, unlaunched. The product needs to go into new packaging. It needs a new name. So there's two options facing Nvidia here. First of all, everything in the stack now moves down a rung, right? So the 4080 12 gigabyte becomes a 4070 rather, and then the 4070 becomes whatever, 4060 Ti, whatever. That's one potential route forward, but potentially a less problematic approach is simply to make up a new name, 4070 Ti,
Oh,
for
gosh.
example.
4075.
4075.
They've
yeah.
done that
40
before. They've done the
40
Oh, that's true. They have. Haven't, like the 275, right? The GTX.
275. Yeah, and there was also two versions of that, or is that the 270 I'm thinking of?
I
Gosh,
can't remember.
Nvidia does this crap. What is this?
4070 special.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the one sort of element towards it, which I think is a logistical problem, but the right thing to do.
Have they done a Super Ti yet? Because they've done the Super,
only
they've done the
a matter of
Ti.
time.
What if it's the Super Ti?
The 470 Super Ti. Oh,
4070 Super Ti.
Like I said, don't give them
there's
ideas.
there's now a stigma attached to this product, so wherever it lands, it's going to be eyed with suspicion, I think. I mean, the issue, I think, well, obviously there's the whole issue of the fact that there were two 4080s of wildly differing performance levels that just couldn't never work. I don't know why it happened, but there it is. We should talk about the specs that were released because I've crunched the numbers on them. These specs are, I think, fair to say, Alex, rather odd in their choice of games and also in their performance differentials.
Yes.
They're all over the place. I've crunched the numbers here. And I think that the main problem facing the 4080 12 gigabyte, such as it was, is the 3080, right? Which had an MSRP of 699. This has an MSRP of 899, or did have. Therefore, that's a circa, 27% uplift in pricing. But according to NVIDIA's own numbers, you're not getting anything like, well, you're not getting 27% more performance. If we look at, first of all, Flight Simulator, it is, let's have a quick look here.
Rich, I think it's less about that, and it's more just like if you're at 899, then you're pretty much now in the current territory for Ampere 3090s.
Yeah, the benchmarks are actually quite close to the 3090 and 3090 Ti, depending on the benchmark.
Exactly.
Right? But the problem is, and
What
always
it's
has
replacing.
been, the 3080 699 products. I mean, that was the big problem with the Ampere line, right? You had the 3080 at 699. That was based on the top end GA102 processor. Really good card. And then we had all of these derivatives: 3080 12 gig, 3080 Ti, 3090, 3090 Ti. The performance delta between the 3090 Ti and the 3080 is about 25%, and that is rapidly diminishing the further down that stack you go until you get to the 3080. But the point is, the 3080 at 699 presents big problems from a value perspective to a 4080 12 gigabyte at 899. So if it's 27% more expensive, Plague Tale, according to their own numbers, the 4080 12 gig is only 12% faster than the 3080. That doesn't make sense. Flight Simulator, which is can be a very GPU heavy game depending on where you bench, 22% faster than the 3080. You're still not getting any kind of generational benefit in terms of value.
It's like another Ampere card that supports DLSS 3, basically.
Well, it's in that region of 3080 to 3090 to 3090 Ti performance. It's kind of like in a massive grey area where you had at the one end. I mean, if you're comparing that card to 3080 Ti upwards, the pricing looks reasonable. But when you've got the 3080 at 699, that's hugely problematic. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of variables there that just kind of work in the 4080 12 gigabyte favor, but only if the 3080 does not exist. And it does, and it's awesome. And we've said right from the get-go what a great card that
I think
was.
Also, I don't know what you guys think, but I wonder if the crash of the crypto market had anything to do with this, right? Because there was a time where you just couldn't get any of these cards, certainly not at MSRP, right? And if that were still the case now, I think they would have had less troubles launching it as is. But now, like, the market is flooded with Ampere stock. It's pretty easy to get them below MSRP now. And this product kind of starts to make less sense given the current market situation.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sits in a weird position in terms of pricing where it kind of would have made sense, A, if the 3080 didn't exist, and B, if there wasn't this massive torrent of Ampere cards coming down in quite low prices. So that's kind of what's necessitated this kind of drop. I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing there to differentiate it except DLSS 3, which I think you'll agree, Alex, is really exciting technology, but isn't fully baked yet.
Yeah, it needs like one iteration before I'd say like this makes it a no-brainer, kind of like, it needs like a 0.1 version essentially to make it a no-brainer to say you definitely should grab a Ada Lovelace card versus Ampere. One thing that I'm thinking about as well with this too, them unlaunching it, is that it wasn't just about the negative reaction from people who would possibly be interested in this, but also it was just like a huge rife target opportunity for AMD to just like destroy the upper mid-range section of NVIDIA stack. They could have put out a card that could, within 1 month, be outpriced and outperformed by an AMD equivalent in that stack range. And them kind of pulling it back allows that AMD to maybe launch first and them to have a much more reactionary price point. That is something that could have also have happened, maybe. But I just want to say one thing, that I think this was a really bad idea from the beginning. And I think what they should do to kind of win over some, like, I don't know how you say it, like win over some points, some kudos for doing something, not just unlaunching it, but bringing it back in like such a competitive way, where I really still am looking for that, what I expect to see after a console launches. 2 years later, 2 times the performance, like a mid-range price point, not whatever this was. It could fulfill that potential based upon how it's slotted between a 3080 and a 3090 Ti. It is about, it's that 2 times console rasterized performance, compute performance, way better in RT, obviously, than even that, but it could be that. It just needs to be quite a bit cheaper. I personally would like to see it be about 200 USD cheaper, to maybe see that real gen-on-gen difference with the 3080, which it should be with its new name. I would like to see that, but I don't know if NVIDIA is up to the task these days. They seem to love pricing their products pretty highly.
That's an interesting point, though, Alex, because then let's say they rename it to like a 70 series, right? And then they drop it 200. It would be 699, right? Which
That'd be
is
good.
The 3080 price. So now you have a 70 series card for the price of the 3080. So if they have to drop it, if they're going to drop the tier down, I think. If they left it at 899 and it became a 70 product, then the value proposition seems even worse, right? Because then you're like,
worse.
it's 200 more than last gen's 80 series card. So
there's no positive way to spin this in terms of pricing across the board. 4090 had an excuse of sorts in that it was 3090 money essentially, and it offered
even better
huge
value.
performance uplift. But the problem again is this 3080 at 699, right? I mean, now your proper, the one true 4080 is $1,200 up from $699. So there's no way out of a bad pricing story from NVIDIA here. What they have done, I think, is they've removed the most contentious product from the stack by far, and basically punted it into the future, possibly, as Alex suggests, post AMD, so they don't, there won't be a reaction. They can react to AMD this time. I still think, though, that this 4080 16 gigabytes in a bit of a precarious position, but at the very least, if we go back to the RTX 4000 launch, all of the great stuff was basically eclipsed by the numbers on the 4080 12 gig, which just did not stack up. So nobody was talking about the great stuff. So I guess at least come November the 16th, when reviews for the new one true 4080 come along, at least there won't be this boat anchor of the 4080 12 gigabyte dragging down that particular story. But even so, there's, I mean, again, these benchmarks from NVIDIA are kind of weird. It's kind of, it can be quite performant up against the 4090, which is kind of what you want. But then you look at the Plague Tale Requiem benchmark, where, holy crap, the 4090 is 93% faster. How does that work?
I have no idea, because it doesn't line up with the specs for both of the 4080s. And it's not like they have a technological difference. Like, we know that Ada Lovelace cards have a benefit in ray tracing titles if there's like optional technology used, like this SER shader reordering thing. And it also has some other benefits like that. But within the Ada Lovelace stack, we shouldn't see that kind of a difference, this out of proportion difference. So either NVIDIA is trying to release benches that make their cards look worse for some reason than they really are, or that's a very weird title. I can't wait to get my hands on with it, and test out its ray tracing performance to see what the heck is going on there. But that's not a good look at all for this now defunct GPU.
Alex, I hate to break it to you, but the Plague Tale Requiem benchmark is ray tracing off.
Oh no! Then what is happening? That doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, it's baffling, right? Flight Simulator shows the 4080 16 gig and 4090 actually very, very close to one another, because we can safely assume it's CPU limited there.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's kind of a baffling situation here. And I just guess in the here and now, right, the 3080 that's 699, it's 2-year-old MSRP. Still looking really good, right?
Yep.
So it's going to be a case of, I don't know how this is all going to shake out in terms of the launch, because as you pointed out, there's just so many Ampere cards out there that are making this one look quite shaky. At least there does seem to be some clear water between the 4080 16 gig and 3090 Ti and 3080, but even so, it's expensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crazy stuff. Any more thoughts about this one? I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a U-turn from a graphics manufacturer quite this big, certainly not in the last decade. The only vague remembrance I have is the Hawaii cards from AMD. They actually shipped them out to reviewers and then gave us a BIOS that actually increased the performance of the 290. So they actually fundamentally shifted the capabilities of the product pre-launch. But in terms of actually rebranding a product before it's actually come out, I don't think there was in the opposite direction. There was the GTX 670, which became the GTX 680.
Yeah, about that. Yeah, but yeah.
But this is kind of like going to be the opposite.
It's going to be the opposite. And I hope it's also a lesson in humility for NVIDIA, that like at the end of the day, you can price your products in a certain way, but at the end of the day, someone actually has to buy them and want to buy them. And I think they read the room super hard. Like, no one is going to want to buy this. It's just no one's going to buy it. So, wow.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think this leaves the 4080 16 gig at $1199? That's a tall order, isn't it?
It's probably going to need a price drop, right, at some point in the near future, just because it's priced between something that is just, like the 4090 here is just like amazing GPU, and it looks so much more price performant than the thing underneath it, which at that, like when you're already spending this really large amount of money, like it may sound weird to say, but like once you go over $1,000 for a GPU, it kind of just like feels really arbitrary when you start adding on like another 100 or 200 on there. It's just a weird, like, I don't know if that's just my sense of the world, but it just feels like it starts getting arbitrary, the price point. And you go down, you would lose, like, what is saying, like, someone who could get a 4080, like, why not just grab a 4090? As weird as that sounds, but like, you're already in this price.
Some might say that's what they kind of want you to do. Right? That's buy the most expensive product because it is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's not a good value.
But the benchmarks are again all over the place to actually get an idea of how much faster the 4090 is compared to the 4080. According to F122, which seems to be the most sane benchmark of the three that were released, 4090 is 39% faster than 4080 16 gig. and the 4090 is 33% more expensive.
Hmm.
This point about cost above $1,000, I get what you're saying, but there is still a $400 delta there.
Yeah, it's still big.
I guess
Yeah.
though, when you're going up to, I think they were trying to sell the 3090 Ti for $2,000. That's
That was too much.
that's eye-watering stuff there. Yeah, so I guess that's all we've really got to say about this. I'm going to be interested to see how the product eventually reaches the market and what they're going to do pricing wise, because that's the big bone of contention. And also, really, what's going to happen with this glut of Ampere cards and MSRPs? I mean, baffling, right? I mean, this is a really bad time to launch a product, for any product really, that isn't the 4090.
Yeah. I mean, maybe EVGA will have a blowout on their old Ampere stock.
Well, that puts another thing into perspective, right? Which is that this is a pretty messy launch, and maybe EVGA just decided right now's the time to duck out because this is going to be really difficult to sell this. But yeah, crazy stuff. I guess that's all we got to say about the 4080 12GB until we see it again at some time in the future. And I guess with that, we're going to return to our original DF Direct Weekly that we filmed just before this news dropped. And the news discussion point was, to begin with, I think, reaction to the 4090 launch.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
So let's crack on with that.
I think this has been a really cool launch week regarding RTX 4000 because there's been so many different reviews focusing on different aspects of the card, and I've liked that quite a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, is there any particular aspects that stand out? I think the thing for me that stood out quite dramatically was the power consumption thing. Everybody was worried about 450 watt GPUs, and indeed, it can reach 450 watts, but that is the peak, and people have been under powering it and still getting, I think it was something like 95% of the result at 300 watt or something crazy like that.
Yeah, you can limit to like 380 or 3080 or 3090 levels of wattage using the power limiter, not undervolting, which apparently has different behavior. But then you can retain a lot of the power. And I think that's interesting, Rich, because I think it points out that NVIDIA is trying to do everything in their power, sorry to use that word again, to try to head off whatever AMD is going to be releasing in their stack at the higher end. And I think that's what it's about. They're pushing, it isn't cool, I guess, in that perspective that they're pushing the card for like environmental reasons to like this absolute high point where its efficiency is so low from the get-go in terms of where it is on the power curve. But it shows that they want to be as confident next to their competition as possible. So you as the consumer are technically getting, at least within the power and the die there, as much as that GPU can put out reasonably within that power limit. And I think that's pretty good. Obviously the environmental thing is always another question, but it does point out that down the stack, which we'll get to when we talk about all this, that down the stack, especially like that mid or lower range or laptop GPUs, that Ada Lovelace, this architecture here, actually has a lot of scaling in it. Something that is maybe that we didn't see as much under Ampere with its, 8 nanometer Samsung process, which was less power efficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. John, any thoughts on what's your takeaway from the launch so far? Somebody who's not been directly involved in it.
Yeah, I've been kind of viewing this from the sidelines, checking out various reviews. And the actual takeaway is, so if you look at this card just from the prospect of what this is, well, speak 4090, I guess, but there's also the other cards as well, but which we'll talk about later. But the 4090 to me seems like one of the first times where NVIDIA kind of delivered, I think, what people seemingly wanted, where you still get all the fancy new features, right? Ray tracing, the tensor cores are still there. We got DLSS 3 and all that. But the rasterized performance is just absurd this time. And that's the thing that was kind of missing a little bit from previous generations. They kind of pushed that up through the roof. And we've hit the point where it's just so fast that most people, I think, don't even have a CPU that can really drive this thing. So as a result, that means that you always see people talking about how, do you use ray tracing? And the answer is often no. They don't want to use ray tracing because it takes too large of a performance hit. And I understand that. You want those higher frame rates. The 4090, however, seems like it can finally deliver this, where you actually get reasonably fast performance with ray tracing without having to make the sacrifices that you did in the past. So it's kind of like opening up the door for this kind of stuff, which is exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I mean, there is no reason. I mean, when I was benchmarking Control without RT on, just seemed kind of pointless. I've got the
Right.
I've got the performance there to use it without really worrying about it. I mean, obviously, you should still be using DLSS 2, right? But the point is that you don't have to think about potential compromises of DLSS 2 performance mode. It just runs perfectly well at quality mode, which, in most scenarios should look better than native 4K anyway. Just because certainly in the case with Control, the TAA in there is pretty lousy, and DLSS just looks better anyway. But across the board, it's just a case of I actually think this is a double-edged sword, right? I think it's a bit of an issue, actually. If you think about it, rasterized performance is essentially solved at 4K high refresh rate screens. You don't have to worry about settings anymore. You're always above 100 frames per second.
Yeah, for now.
Which is kind of nuts, right? And then you're at ray tracing. You just kick in DLSS quality mode. That's solved as well. But here's the thing, right? I mean, if you don't have specifically a 4K or something very close to it and high refresh rates, then you've got a lot of GPU power that's not going to be utilized.
Yeah, that's right? Like lower res monitors seem to be still very common in the PC space, right? According to
1440p at higher refresh rates is the norm. And I honestly think, I mean, I'd love to test it, but my 1440p testing suggests you're just going to hit a CPU bottleneck, which is not ideal.
Which, I mean, that seems like that was part of the basis for DLSS 3 in the first place, was to sort of decouple your actual like frame rate from your CPU in a way, right? Because you might be bumping up against some limitations there, and then the card can push it further. Because other than that, right now, DLSS 3 seems not that useful at the moment. Like, it's very cool, but you can just
not on a 4090, no.
Right.
I can imagine the utility on the 4080 and 4070,
it's a lot more useful there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel Spider-Man's the case in point, right, Alex? It runs at 120 frames per second already. And then, it will propel you up to 200 frames per second, but there isn't a 4K 200 hertz screen.
Yeah, it's a really funny situation where the card is so fast without much like mitigation technologies like DLSS 2 or 3 that it just kind of shows that for the level of graphical fidelity we are currently at, that DLSS 3 on the 4090 is a little bit of, I don't always like using this word, but overkill. We kind of need the cross-gen to die off and for these next-gen games to come out to make DLSS 3 like its most ultimate kind of thing. And there's some hints at that coming down the line. I think Plague Tale is going to be coming out very soon, which according to the recommended specs, is really heavy at even 1080p. Cyberpunk update is going to be one of them. Those path traced remasters. We also have the luring kind of background here of what is the first UE5 game going to actually run and look like. Because we don't really, I mean, the demo's there. They do have they say like, okay, like internal resolution's like 1080p 30 on consoles. Then it's like obviously 4K TSR'd up quite a bit and it looks really good. But like, what about that on the 4090?
Have either of you tried that, by the way, the Matrix demo?
I haven't tried it out yet. Technically, I don't know if I was just about to actually compile the 5.1 demo because I was in contact with some people at Epic, and they're like, you got to try it out, Alex. It's a lot better. So I'm going to try that out at some point. But I think the 4090 would be really interesting to look at there. But I don't know if I could actually get DLSS 3 into that demo just yet.
just with the 4090 in general, going back to my point, Alex, you're working on an embargoed product game at the moment. You were running it on the 4090, and
Yes.
like there were no meaningful performance numbers.
Yeah, it's just like
because it just maxes.
it just
Alex's
maxes
recommended
the game.
settings. Turn it up.
So, yeah, just max, but it's like at that point you're just doing really placebo things. Like you can run the game like super downsampled, and it's like it's already like 4K. It's already really, really good looking. Like it just kind of shows that we need higher settings in games for GPUs like this, like things that really test it, which we're definitely going to have. I think we're going to definitely have that soon.
Yeah, I think the one thing which sticks out to me though is that if you go back to all of the Titans, if you go back to the 3090 Ti, not the 3090 Ti, 3090, that was the launch version for Ampere. They were the luxury cards for the people that had a lot of money, but the actual meaningful performance gain over the mainstream products, which in that case was the 3080, it was about 15%. It's not a big deal, but with the stack that they've announced, that is not going to be the case. So they are actually now positioning the super high-end offering as offering a meaningful performance boost. The question is what you do with that performance, and I agree that we've basically reached the point where we're waiting for the generation of games to tap into that power. And actually, let's go to a question from a new Patreon supporter, Chili Con Carne, that is his hacker alias. With products like the 4090 and presumably future generations where cheaper cards match or exceed its performance, well, that's another topic altogether. Seems like PC gaming is heading to a paradigm shift in rendering a full ray/path tracing without rasterization. Wraith tracing. That's the way forward. But developers would need to create bespoke PC versions to take advantage of this hardware. Is that really going to happen? Is this much horsepower actually going to be relevant when most gamers are on consoles that aren't made with RT in mind, or will we reach the stage of mostly academic upgrades from 150 to 200 FPS until the PS5 RT Xbox Series Battaglia comes along?
Series Battaglia.
Series Battaglia.
Series
So Alex, this is like, there is actually an interesting point here, which is, I'll give you my theory, which is if you look at what Cyberpunk is doing, essentially we're looking at two forks in the rendering pipeline. You've got your rasterization fork, and you've got your sort of high-end ray tracing fork, and then there's kind of like a blurry middle ground of hybrid.
Yeah.
The question here is essentially, well, are developers going to bother with full path tracing if it's not the mainstream end of the market? My question to you, Alex, is there is actually a path tracing option within UE5, right?
Yeah, there is. So
could that be deployed? Could that be repurposed / deployed?
I think so, actually. So like right now, like there is a path tracer within UE5, and you can just like toggle it on. It's pretty awesome. So it's really cool. You don't really need to even change much about anything because it's just changing like Lumen over to something that's more holistic at that point. And the only thing right now is like the denoiser in it is set to like a progressive mode where it gets just better and better over time. Kind of like like what you're used to using for like, I don't know, like Arnold or Blender, like when you just let it render out for longer so you have better samples and it looks prettier. So they would have to change its denoiser to be a more real-time orientated one, like the one we see in the Cyberpunk Overdrive, or something like we see in Quake 2 RTX, Minecraft, etc. And then it could actually totally be a viable option to ship in games. It would obviously have very different performance constraints, but it would actually be a really cool way with little fuss, honestly, to transfer a game over to like and scale on these newer GPUs. I don't know if that is actually a plan for at all. UE5 in the near future. There is an NV branch of UE5 that does incorporate elements of this, like it gets rid of like the standard lighting system for like point lights, etc., and replaces it all with RTX DI, which is kind of like the first step into a path tracer. So this is something that definitely devs could do. But the larger scale question is will we just sit around and have games on the RTX 4090 for a while now running at just like 150 FPS at 4K or something like that? I don't know. In the past, when PC gaming was like in a lull point, like 2009 to 2013, where it was kind of rare to see super high-end ultra options in a lot of games, yeah, that could have been a danger. But now I think the industry's shifting a lot more, that PC is really, really big, and there's a market for these GPUs, if just looking at how they sold out. I think we are going to see high-end options in the games. That will surprise us. We just got to wait a little bit for the cross-gen to die out, because it's still here in full force.
I think there's also the argument being made that we're seeing things happening in games that are just happening either because NVIDIA is investing in it, potentially even funding developers to do it, or it's simply the case that developers really want to get to grips with new tech. So, example, I can't see any real commercial incentive for a small developer like Remedy to have ramped up Control with all of the ray tracing goodness that it has, unless one or two of those criteria are met. Funding from NVIDIA to make it look as amazing as it does, and number two, the developers really wanted to do it. So, even in the RTX 2000 era, there was still movement being made to create these showpiece experiences. So that take-up, I can't see it not continuing for whatever reason. Interesting question here actually from Andre Serles, and I guess it will relate to this testing of the new version of Matrix Awakens. UE5 base rates and DLSS 3.0, maybe not a good combo. It is a good combo if the CPU side is sorted out, right?
Yeah. Like, it is actually a really good combo. And I think that's the one thing that UE 5.1 and future iterations beyond that are going to be focusing a lot on. You talked about this quite well in your review, Rich. I didn't focus on it because I was just kind of talking about the GPU side of things. But like, even if you are CPU limited, you can still make usage out of DLSS 3 by capping your frame rate in some way. And the way you do that is like, I have to probably do a little bit more testing, but the way I described it in my video was you cap your frame rate by pumping up your settings. You like put like an artificial cap there by just organically changing your settings. But, I don't think that's really forward and a really compelling way to limit your performance in games. I think NVIDIA with DLSS 3, they definitely need to have this VSync support and a good way to arbitrarily kind of cap your frame rate that doesn't involve like a latency penalty that is egregious. But that's a little bit of a side story. I think UE5 soon enough, it just needs to get out of this like ultra beta phase it started in, will actually get a lot better on the CPU side of things, because there was a lot of critique. It wasn't just like us making a video. There was that presentation from the coalition about UE5 saying like, there's a large CPU overhead here for us getting to 60 FPS, ignoring all the Lumen stuff. It was just there and they wanted to change. So I think Epic's moving in that direction. It's going to get better. They've been much more, they listen to feedback a lot more now these days than they probably did in the past, because it's such a popular engine. So many developers have switched over to it, even though I find that sad. So yeah, I think I wouldn't worry about it too much right now in its current state of performance. Rather, in like 6 months to a year, when we start seeing the first games, then it's going to become really interesting, because we'll actually see what developers did with all that tech beyond the demos. Maybe it's different than what the demos show.
So, John, what's your display and display resolution and refresh rate? Because yours is not 4K, but it is pretty impressive nonetheless.
Yeah, it's an oddball one. It's a 21 by 10 monitor, so it's 3840 by 1600.
Okay, so it's kind of almost 4K.
Yeah, 4K wide, but cropped basically.
Yeah.
And I usually run it at 160 hertz, I think.
Okay. Interesting. So I think you may well certainly on non-RT games, you're probably going to have a bit of overhead left over there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of nuts.
But your monitor is actually kind of perfect, actually, for DLSS 3 in terms of the refresh rate ceiling. Yeah. It's pretty good with like if you maxed out a game. So that's interesting use case there. Yeah.
Well, it's all about the base frame rate, right? So your base frame rate, assuming it was capped at 160, would be 80,
Yeah,
which is a really good
a
place
little
to
bit
be.
less than 80 or more than 80 technically. I think
Hmm.
this is one thing that I didn't actually talk about in the review, but like it's the reason why you don't see frame rate doubling exactly always is because there's that cost that's added into the frame time from DLSS 3 frames being generated at all. So that's why in Spider-Man, when you're not GPU limited, it looks more like a doubling than it does, for example, in, I don't know, Cyberpunk or something like that. But yeah, like your base frame rate there, you could get right up to like right below your refresh rate there, John.
Excellent.
Exciting.
Yeah.
There's so many questions we've got, and I guess I'm just going to rattle through them. um, uh, Samuel Clemson says, "Hey DF, with DLSS3 being a hot topic, just wondering if, as the technology improves with time, could you insert 2 frames instead of 1 for more
Ooh.
performance?" So this is actually a really good question. If you go back to the interview we did with Tom Peterson from Intel,
Mm-hmm.
he actually just outright posited that as a thing that's going to happen. And whether it happens in this kind of DLSS3 first gen remains to be seen. But there's 2 things I'd like to highlight there. The first one being for more performance. I'm still grappling with the idea of whether this is actually a performance boost or not, because your system isn't actually running any faster. In fact, you can argue it's running slightly slower. It's just that the extra processing overhead is being used to generate a smoother output. So perceptually, it is a performance increase.
Didn't we say
But
it's just more like a frame rate increase rather than like a
I think
performance
that's
boost?
probably the best way to, rather than talking about performance multipliers, we talk about frame rate multipliers, because that just sidesteps a really difficult issue. Uh, what do you reckon, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I
They
think
they could insert more frames, right? It's just, if it, let's say for example they halved the cost of DLSS 3 frame generation, then they could insert another frame and it would probably work all right. If you're now moving to 240 frames per second, then you're looking at a what, 4 point something
yeah,
millisecond persistence per frame. It's
yeah,
going to look kind of nutty.
I think it could be totally doable. Just by like varying the time step. Essentially, like the game's already using delta time anyway. They have a good idea with the motion vectors, like the exact distance in screen space that something's moved. They can totally do it. There are a couple of questions in there. Rich highlighted one is that like, well, then all of a sudden you're having to generate another frame. And that is going to cost time in both real latency, like that what I was just talking about earlier about how like the frame rate not actually doubling. So it's going to cost a little bit more real performance in that aspect, unless there's like another generation of this machine learning and fixed function unit that comes out. And another thing is that I haven't taken the time to draw it down on a piece of paper, but I don't know what the implication would be for input latency at all necessarily, because like there's this like weird gray zone there that I still don't have my head completely around. Like it's not exactly the cost of like if you run it without VSync, like I showed in the review and Rich also did in his initial video. Like if you run it without VSync, you're getting a really good understanding of like what the change in PC latency is there. And it's not 3 milliseconds, which is like the cost of like what it costs on the fixed function unit to render out or whatever. It's like a little bit less or more than the frame it's holding on to. It's really weird. I don't know exactly what it's coming on from. I have to just like think about it a bit more, maybe even ask NVIDIA to like do it like a deep dive on it, because it's not very intuitive. But I think, yeah, it's totally possible. Tom Peterson said as much. I think Intel's going to come out with this tech next based upon that interview we had. And they seem to be already working on so much AI stuff that they definitely probably are working on it. But it's just a matter of like time. It's really hard to say, Sam. I wish I had a better answer for you there.
Yeah, fair enough. Another interesting question, Alan Lindqvist. I'm curious about DLSS 3 frame generation for really low frame rates. Alex showed 30 to 60 in his video, But could it go even lower? 20, 15? It may be academic, but I think it could apply to a 40, 50 or next gen Switch. It couldn't really go lower, could it? Let's be honest, Alex. Not in its current iteration.
No, I mean,
realistic. I mean, it could produce an output, right? It just wouldn't be very good to play.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a good playing out because, like 20 FPS, even just like without reflex and without, that's the garbage input latency, 20 FPS, it's not really good. You don't want to be doing that in almost any real-time game. It's like fine, obviously, for something like on the PS1 with turn-based battles, but that's not what we're usually playing these days. So like you could go lower. And I think Sam at Ars Technica looked at running Flight Simulator at 40 to 50 FPS using DLSS 3. I forget what exactly he did to do that. But he said it looks
insane super sampling.
Yeah, that's what it probably was. So like you could do it, and he said it looks surprisingly okay, all things considered, but it's not like a real scenario. I honestly think the idea of testing an RTX theoretical, like an RTX 4050 or whatever it is, I don't think DLSS 3 there is going to be about getting 30 to 60. I think it's going to be taking what your DLSS 2 experience would be at like 60 FPS and making it more compelling from a visual smoothness perspective. I think it's about getting that 4050 up to 90 or 100 with ray tracing, much like it is for the 4080 and 4090. Because I think that's the sweet spot for this type of technology in terms of like the way you want your game to feel, in terms of input, as well as in terms of just like what looks compelling on the screen. I really wish we could communicate this in video form. Rich put out a Patreon video, 4K 120 for Patreon viewers to download, so they got a taste of it. But everyone in YouTube land, unless you have an RTX 4090, which very few will have, you're gonna just have to be like sitting there and listening to me talk about what looks good or what another reviewer thinks
there is a potential solution, Alex, but it's not stable, which is if you've got a 4K 120 hertz display to run the video at 2 times speed.
Yeah, I don't trust that. I don't, because like I think browsers have really garbage performance, like for giving back frames. Like YouTube's constantly dropping frames even at 60 FPS. I think John sees the same thing all the time.
It's never smooth. No,
it's never smooth. So I don't trust it to do it at 2 times the frame rate at the moment.
So another question which is coming up generally, the whole question of latency. Latency is now being thrust into the limelight in a way that it never has before, simply because of DLSS 3. There has been some really good latency testing out there in the past, but it's never really been a focus for mainstream outlets. And the question is latency suddenly an issue because of DLSS 3? And I think you and I both agree, Alex, that it's kind of not, assuming that your base frame rate is high enough. I just wanted to bring in some numbers that we do have. Tom did some testing on input lag on first-person shooters on consoles many, many moons ago. This was in the kind of Infinite Warfare era, Battlefield 4 era. Just looking at his table of results here, all of these games basically target 60 frames per second. The lowest latency was Infinite Warfare with 39.3 millisecond input lag.
Wow.
However, Doom 2016 was 86.8 millisecond input lag.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those games are effectively locked at 60 frames per second. So there is a wider discussion to be had about latency. And I think DLSS 3 frame generation is kind of like almost a side component that's probably less important than this concept that different engines just have different levels of latency inherently, even when they're targeting the same frame rate. So, we're looking at like almost a 50 millisecond latency delta between Call of Duty and Doom 2016. I mean, even a competitive shooter on the consoles, Overwatch here, is coming in with a latency of 76.8 milliseconds.
At 60.
Which is kind of, at 60, which is kind of putting my result on Cyberpunk of 54 milliseconds into relief with DLSS 3. And again, I was looking at your video, and you had a different.
I tested a different area in the game. That's the thing.
Well, it seemed to be 54, whatever happened when I did it, but it did seem to be lower in your result than mine. But that's the other thing. That's another potential thing, right? Which is the concepts that the rendering pipeline might just be least less stressed in different areas, resulting in a lower latency. I mean, this table really is quite illuminating in that, basically going back in time, the more complex your rendering pipeline, the more parallelization there is, typically the more lag. So even if you're buffering up to 60 frames per second, you can still have quite a lot of lag in there.
Yeah.
So
it's such an interesting topic. I think you brought it up, and I thought it was really good to say when we're talking about DLSS 3 changes to PC and input latency, it really does need the stressed fact there on the bottom of the page. It's not just about what it is adding there, because each game will have a different baseline of what 60 FPS or 120 FPS feels like, and it will vary across vendors, AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA. And if the game has reflex, it's going to be quite lower on NVIDIA. That perspective, I think, needs to be in there, because there is no objective 60 FPS feel. And there's no objective 120 FPS feel as well, too. Rather, it needs to be seen on a spectrum. I think it would be really cool to have a graph that plots it, says here's Killzone 2 with its first patch or without its first patch, and which we all have a general idea about how meme-worthy that is, versus the equivalent of 240 hertz, I don't know, some super competitive game, and then you'd see there's this gradation there. Or so, something like that. They can all be at the same frame rate, for all I care. But the whole point is you need to see it on a scale to actually appreciate whether or not this is something that is meaningfully significant. Because I just said the numbers in the video, and I didn't give a great baseline comparison to say what does this actually feel like, which is something I probably should have done after the fact. Now I'm looking at the footage and everything like that. I'm like, oh man, I really should have maybe said that. But yeah, I think that's this input latency discussion requires a sliding graph that says this is what a really quick and snappy feels game like, and this is what a less snappy feels games like, and here's where our tests lie. So that's what's missing, and we should probably do it.
Fair enough. Jona's question here: should DLSS 3 be upgraded to work with frame rate caps in mind? For example, if you cap a game at 120 FPS, the game will then only render 60 real frames before relying on DLSS to generate the 60 additional frames to hit the target. On a desktop, this should allow you to crank up the graphics further, and on a laptop, this should be more power battery efficient. Yeah, wow, this whole VSync thing is a really interesting discussion point, because running unlocks, you're basically getting more real frames and lower latency. But at the same time, if you've got on a standard display, you've got to run with VSync off. That's not really something I'd like to do. And on a G-Sync on screen, you move out of your G-Sync window and you get tearing, which to me is not a G-Sync experience. But as Jonas points out, if you do introduce a frame rate cap, then you are potentially limiting your amount of actual performance within the system, which could potentially be problematic. But as he said, it could be very good for efficiency and laptop battery life.
Yeah, man, this is a hard question because the VSync situation is not optimal right now. It's not good. I want VSync in DLSS 3. I want a interesting way to cap the frames that allows the GPU to be working quite well and not just being I don't want to use, not shooting itself in the knee, essentially, to have a good VSync experience. That's what I would really like. And until they get there, this question's a bit theoretical because they're not there yet. I would love that. I would love this. I tried out, actually, all of my testing. I didn't even say this in the video. I did all of my testing with BFI on. Because John was, ever since I've been to John's place, I've been like, BFI is great, BFI is great. So I did all of my 120 FPS VSync testing with BFI on to see if what artifacts I was seeing. So that's how I did it. And that's how I used it. The only thing is it was not on a game per game basis, it was not necessarily optimal from an input latency perspective due to that issue I highlighted out with VSync increasing input latency much more than VSync off when you hit the VSync limit. In a game like Spider-Man, I honestly didn't really notice and care much of anything. It actually felt really good. Cyberpunk was the same way. The Lyra demo, oddly enough, with VSync, felt so much heavier than the other games on the mouse. That was a very interesting thing to talk about that I didn't talk about. Because it was just like, it felt weird to like interject like a really subjective opinion after doing this super scientific thing. But yeah, so like, I would love to see this happen on laptops. It's going to be a really cool situation. Very curious to see what type of laptops are even made with this, because I've got like what's that Razer laptop I have, which is like 300
hertz? 300 hertz.
Yeah.
So you'd need to run at 75 or 150.
Yeah, something like that. And yeah, that's like somewhat compelling. It'd be, maybe this is where this technology is even better than on desktop. Maybe it is laptops. I don't know.
Does the idea of BFI appeal to you, John, if you can use DLSS 3 just to lock to 120?
I mean, sure. The only thing I would be concerned is does it reveal the generated frame issues more easily?
That's the question. That is the question.
I don't know, Alex. What did you see?
I mean, I was doing it all at 120. I did not do any. I found it useless to do any testing where there was just full screen tearing. I was like, this is not a play scenario. No one's playing this.
Yeah, but the concept of black frame insertion is similar to DLSS 3 in that you're strobing. Right?
Yeah, right.
And the question is, when you have your bright frames with BFI, are you actually highlighting the generated frames?
No, it's still,
No.
I did it. That's why I did all my testing with BFI, and maybe it actually exaggerated things more than most higher persistence displays would have. Like, maybe I really should have put that in the video. Like, for example, like, I think some of the stuff I saw with BFI on, like, very specifically, I said, like, I noticed a slight darkening when muzzle flashes were occurring. Like, it was a darker look than the real one. I honestly don't think on, like, a persistence display, like one without BFI, I honestly don't think you notice that, because the frames in your eye are just going to be blending over when there's a muzzle flash anyway. It's just like the brightness level there, especially with like HDR brightness. I don't think you'd maybe see that. So this is a really cool, John, I would say actually, whenever you get an RTX 4000 card, I would love that we could maybe talk about this in a video. It'd be so fun to hear what you say about it, because you have such a good eye for these persistence issues. So you'd be perfect for it.
Yeah, we can check it out.
Question from Bespoken. Good on-brand username there. Hi DF crew, considering how ridiculously powerful 4090 is, especially at 4K, you guys have any suggestion on how to use the leftover performance for today's games, especially on resolutions like 1440p? I've just got a really nice 175 hertz ultra-wide display with the intention of pairing it with a 4090, and basically he's asking whether his CPU is going to be an issue, and it possibly could be, but not with DLSS 3 potentially. I mean, you do have the deep learning super sampling option.
Yeah, that's a good way to use that power if the game doesn't offer you enough options to just crank it to stupid levels. So I would say do that for sure. I don't think there's any other like game agnostic way to make the game look better in like a really consistent way. So I think Rich's idea is good, actually.
I think there's a lot of stuff in here that people have already probably had answered with your question, with your video. For example, Kless Orion.
I love the
guys.
names,
I was wondering. Yeah, it's brilliant. Kless Orion is asking, I was wondering, where's the lower FPS limit to break DLSS 3 frame generation? As in, what is the lowest FPS you can enable? You can enable it before it becomes best not to have it on at all. You covered that. It was essentially 40 frames per second.
I was like, it's like, yeah, well, it's whatever.
But it's going to vary on a game basis.
Yeah, it's going to vary on the game basis. Let's not say the input frame rate, because I can't actually guess that. It's technically higher than what the half is, because each frame is technically being rendered in less time than what it says it is. It's such a weird system. But it's like output 80 FPS, I think, is where it started to look like that's where like that 80 FPS is not arbitrary. It's not just me like going like, it looks good to the eye, but it's also kind of like the route that a lot of, how do you call it, VR headsets go. Like there was like a baseline that, people that are a lot smarter than me said, like, we have to have at least like an 85 or 90 hertz presentation here for it to look really good. And, you know, that's kind of like where it actually does fall when you look at it on a screen. So that's what I would say. And like Rich said, though, like, it can technically go lower. I thought 30 to 60 was pretty okay in Cyberpunk from a visual perspective. If Flight Sim wasn't being just broken with VSync, I could have probably said the same thing there. But, you know, those are games that are kind of slower. So maybe you wouldn't want to do it anyways because it's maybe better looking to do it without it at that point. I would say 80.
80 frames per second output.
80 frames per second output, yes. Not,
Right.
not the original frame rate. Yeah. Oh, God.
Fair enough. I mean, I was just thinking back. I mean, when we did first get the card and we did first get the DLSS 3 software, I just connected it to the capture card, 4K 60, turned on DLSS frame generation with Spider-Man. It was surprising. Well, there were two takeaways really. The first one was the input lag really wasn't good, because it's not just the VSync issue you have for increased latency, but the fact you're essentially running at 30 frames per second or slightly higher internally. That wasn't great, but it looked really good overall. But what you did discover is that the frames where it struggled, your mouse look example, for example, in your video, imagine that with a base 30 frames per second thereabouts. And even with the joy, I mean, John highlighted a couple of dodgy frames that came out of that. So yeah, there is a certain level of I think this is essentially designed to enable high refresh rate displays, and anything beyond that likely a bonus. But the lower you go, the more prone you will be to actually detecting artifacts, and the worse the artifacts will be. I think that's the key takeaway there. I think that's basically all of the DLSS 3 questions that we have.
40 minutes.
Sorry to make you sit there, John, and just like sweat it out.
We're gonna get complaints of another PC centric episode.
Oh no, nothing like that. No.
I mean, that's where the news is this week.
That's where it is, brother.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the next news topic. Alex is getting excited.
Oh yes.
Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales. Further details have leaked, or rather been announced, and it looks as though Nixxes are pushing ray tracing on still further with the Insomniac engine. They're adding ray trace shadows to Miles Morales.
Yeah, and
must be excited by this, right?
Yeah, and the scene they showed off too was an indoor shadow as well, which is interesting because I think one of the easiest things to do in regards to ray trace shadows is just replace the sun shadow, because it's one source, it's a little bit more stable. It requires a lot less just time to optimize for. So it seems like it's indoor shadows. I don't know about outdoor shadows yet. That's really awesome. And I think it shows a paradigm that I want to see on the Microsoft side of things, which we haven't seen yet in a while, where the PC port right here of this game is saying, like, Sony's like, it's not like them saying arbitrarily limit what you're doing on PC to make our PS5 look good or something like that. Not putting in DLSS, not letting the settings scale higher in a meaningful way. No, Sony's giving them enough money and time to say, make this thing as cool as possible on PC, which is kind of what they do on PlayStation, right? Sony says, make the coolest PlayStation 4 or 5 game you can, hire the best artists, spend the time to make that look really polished and good. And they're doing that on PC over, a course of patches, as well as this Miles Morales update. And I love this strategy. This is the way PC games should be made. It's so good. This is just, other than praising Nixxes, which I can do anytime, I want to use this as a little opportunity to say that I hope we see a similar level of PC treatment from Microsoft titles coming forward. This is like, Sony stepped up their game. Microsoft should too.
I mean, it's not as if Miles Morales wasn't a good-looking game on PS5, right, John? But this is all really good stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was already really good, but this kind of ties into that question that somebody asked earlier about like what you can do with all this extra performance, and this is a perfect example of it, especially in the case of a console game that already has ray tracing features. I think it's a little bit easier to sort of take that and extend it a bit further to add in additional things like shadows and ambient occlusion, and maybe someday we'll get ray trace global illumination in there as an option. But basically, expand upon the features that already exist to take advantage of more powerful PC hardware, and that's exactly what they're doing, which is great.
So pretty much the only piece of the puzzle missing at this point is RTGI.
Yeah.
That would be so cool.
How does it work on consoles, John? Would it be easy to swap in RTGI?
That's a good question.
Well, I say easy. Is it, let's say, viable rather than easy? Nothing's easy when it comes to this sort of thing.
I mean, the thing with lighting, I guess, it's always tricky is that, when you're using like a pre-calculated system, like a probe system or something, there's a lot of artist setup that goes into this and a lot of manual tweaking and such. And the idea with RTGI, I guess, is that it sort of does it for you. And I could see, if you're not building it from the ground up with that in mind, it could potentially create issues that they maybe didn't foresee with the way the visuals are presented, that don't perfectly match what they were trying to do. So this feels like something that would have to have been considered from the beginning somewhat to make it really viable, right?
Yeah. I'd agree with that assessment. I think it's like in a game with a static time of day like these games have, it's not as, I mean, it's still compelling visually, but like John said, it runs the risk more of in scenes where like an artist like put a bunch of fake lights in, like to simulate GI, and then all of a sudden you switch it out for a real-time GI solution, it may change the artistic representation of the scene a lot. But in a game, for example, with a real-time time of day where they really can't do that anyway, it may be super transformative and really like 99.5% of the time be only a positive thing. So I would like to see that, but maybe it's not so realistic for this type of game.
I'm just really liking the fact that it is actually happening. We are getting these extra features, and it also points to how Sony was really rather wise in buying up Nixies. It's always been a developer. I mean, they've always been great at doing ports, right? But they really know their stuff, and they really try hard to produce some really good conversions. And that's what you're seeing here, right? We're seeing some really good stuff here and extra features, which, we didn't really see them before in to this degree in prior Sony titles, which were even so were still pretty good, right? So really looking forward to seeing what they do next. Obviously, I think the next one up is Uncharted, which I think is an Iron Galaxy joint.
Oh, yes.
So Nix is not involved in that, but I guess we'll get to that one as soon as we can. Let's move on to the final news story. This one is just kind of curious, right, John? Because turns out that 2 unreleased NES game prototypes have been put up for auction on eBay. There's a lot of clamor about them because they've never been digitized. They've never been imaged before. They haven't been preserved. What's the story here? Is there anything interesting here that you want to talk about?
Yeah, it looks like Video Game History Foundation member Frank Cifaldi discovered this sort of popping up for sale. And yeah, it's 2 cartridges. Let me see. The first one is actually the Battlefields of Napoleon. So some sort of strategy game, I suppose. There's even like a mocked box art available for it.
Yeah. And looking at that box art, check out Napoleon.
Oh man, he looks
looking good.
Super sinister.
He's manic.
He's manic. Yeah. Oh, it's from Bruderbund even. Look at that.
Oh,
the simulation series.
They did. Wait, what other sim games did they do? Bruderbund. They did Paint Shop, didn't they?
They did do that, of course. That was their famous thing. They published Prince of Persia, of course, which is one of their big.
They did a bunch of great titles back in the day, and I'm really liking this historical reimagining of Napoleon.
It's pretty good. The other one we saw though is something that just says CES sample, and it's a demo game created by Rare for use with the Power Glove. So I guess this must have been shown at CES, as the name implies. And yeah, it's it's not every day that we see titles that weren't known or ever actually digitized. So these were just kind of floating out there in the ether until this point. So conceivably somebody could just buy it and hold on to it forever, but hopefully it'll actually be properly preserved and sort of shared with the rest of the internet at large.
Hmm.
You know, I can understand why people might not want to do that, but I think it's the best option here. And yeah, it's this is very uncommon thing when games like this pop up that haven't really been seen before. So, I mean, obviously, I guess specifically the CES sample had been seen before, it just disappeared.
Do we even know what it is?
No.
Scanner,
No.
it says. So somebody presumably, I mean, that's assuming it was actually shown at CES and not just created for CES.
And then dropped
But
because the Power Glove
yeah,
sucks.
Yeah, the Power Glove. Wow, not great. That was all those weird alternative input devices were really big on the NES at that time. If you remember,
mm,
the Power Glove was
Hmm.
obviously probably the most famous of them, but none of them really worked very well.
The mat, John.
The
What about the
mat,
mat?
the Roland Rocker,
Yeah, oh, the rocker. Yeah.
that thing. There's so many. It's such a weird time, but yeah, no, just cool new unreleased NES prototypes out there. So I
yeah.
hope we
Well,
can
we
check them
hope it's
out.
cool.
We hope
We
it's
just
cool.
don't know.
I mean, I know Rich is looking forward to Battles of Napoleon here, just based
Well,
on
I
the
am
box
now.
art alone.
Absolutely, yeah.
You'd buy
I mean,
that if
there's
you saw it in the store, right?
well, there's definitely Palpatine unlimited power vibes coming from that box art there.
Oh, certainly.
So that basically automatically makes me interested in it. But I guess that's it. That's it for the news this week. So let's move on to supporter Q&As, part of the show where we weekly on our Patreon we ask our supporters for questions. We've already had a big bunch about RTX 4000. There's more to come, and the first one from Johan van Hellemont. How do you guys feel about CD Projekt Red announcing a plethora of new games? Personally, I get the financial incentive, but I'm fearful the quality in the sense of a unique trait of their games will just change to something I'm no longer interested in. Same sort of thing happened to Arcane as well when they split up into multiple studios, I feel. Uh, John,
A plethora, you say?
plethora,
What
yes.
is a plethora?
It's like a big range,
No, no,
shall we
no, no.
say.
I know.
I do agree
Hefe.
that the usage of the
Yeah,
word
yeah, I
is,
know,
it's
yeah,
not
John.
something you use in common
Alex
usage, is
knows.
it?
I know what it's from, but yeah,
But
that's a good
yeah,
question, John.
uh, I how many times has this actually worked out where a developer announces like a whole range or plethora of games well in advance? I mean, it's often done with, say, you know, chapter based games, like you remember with the Shenmue saga, with Xenosaga, where they're like, yeah, we're gonna do like 8 of these or something.
Yeah.
And they say that before they've even completed the first one. It never works. Sin Episodes 1, anyone? Remember that? You know, I this is a little different because it's just full on new games, I guess, and they're basically just sharing their planning out way ahead of time, which I guess technically they also did with Cyberpunk itself, right? They shared the news of that existing way before it was anywhere close to ready. It was just beginning. But I don't know. I feel like this is not. I'm very skeptical just because I've never really seen it work out that well. Because now
Mm.
this exists in the minds of the people, they know about it, and due to the amount of time it will take to complete, it's gonna feel like it's been in development forever once it actually does start to come around, right? And I think that
Mhm.
Right.
can negatively impact some consumers where they're gonna look at that like, man, the thing's still not out, when it's usually just a case that stuff's not announced until it's closer to being ready. So
Right. Well, there's going to be like more Witcher stuff. They've announced, obviously, they've re-announced the expansion for Cyberpunk. They've announced Orion, which is the next big Cyberpunk title. There's a new IP codenamed Hadar. I guess the concern here is basically, and maybe it's a misconception that all of this stuff will be happening simultaneously, and maybe it will be at a certain level of production, but I don't know. They've typically only really done one major game or dovetailed two together
Mhm.
at a time. So I guess it's a big logistical challenge, and it's a question of whether they can carry it off, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really have any worries. I mean, I don't really have any worries about the concepts that the unique feel of their games would be
No,
compromised
not
as
really.
such. especially if it is like big staggered releases. It's more, I guess, that they're going to be moving to Unreal Engine. That's a bit of a disappointment for me, but
Yep.
there we go. Let's move on to the next question from Dirk Hodderin. Less a question, more a gripe at the industry. But can I get the option to disable TAA and upscaling on consoles, please? Hitman looks beautiful with its crisp native 4K resolution, but games like Battlefield 1, Control, and the Resident Evil remakes have positively nauseating TAA artifacts. Please, I just want to see I want to see the Jaggies and not see ghost trails, gross ghost trails behind me all the time. John, this is problematic.
Yeah, from what I understand, though, in a lot of cases, the TAA is intrinsically linked to the way certain effects work.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like with Doom Eternal, I actually mused over this idea with the Switch version, which is very low resolution, but it turns out that they rely so heavily on prior frame data for generating certain aspects of the visuals that trying to run it without TAA essentially breaks the visuals. So I think this is sort of like a side effect of the way games and effects are kind of designed these days. And I don't think that for that reason that most developers would allow you to disable it, unless of course, I'm sure there are situations where it's not inherently relied upon as much, but yeah, I think by and large, I mean, I obviously like TAA, but I can understand the perspective of not liking some of those artifacts.
I mean, Alex, TAA is all about the reuse of already calculated data for increased efficiency, but also to enable new effects, right?
Yeah, so a lot of the effects you see in these games, especially, well, I can just point out too, Battlefield 1 and RE2 and RE3, especially RE2 and RE3, use TAA, like John was just saying, for so many effects to make them look right, like the SSR, the ambient occlusion, the hair. Like if you turn off the AA in any of the RE engine games, the hair is awful looking. It's the dithered mess. It was just not designed without TAA in mind, which is curious that they even allow you to turn it off in the PC versions, actually. Because I don't know. I don't think this is I think with modern games, it's not very reasonable to expect it to be able to be turned off, but you're also on the wrong platform to be worrying about this, Dirk. Like, this is if you're on PC, you're not having this issue. And actually, I think in every single one of these games, you have a different AA option than what you have on consoles. Like Battlefield 1 allows you to turn it off. RE2 and 3 have like tons of AA options, and Control, you have MSAA if you don't like TAA. So I just feel like you're on the wrong platform maybe for this complaint.
All right.
One thing I'll add to that is I had a briefing with Infinity Ward for Call of Duty, and I actually got to see how the image looks without TAA reconstruction. And the resolution is so low that you wouldn't want it. Trust me, it's there for a reason. Let's move on to the next question from Soren Balco. Do you think a tripartite GPU market, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, is sustainable in the long term? Or put differently, what market segments do you see the three vendors successfully occupy? How can they meaningfully differentiate their GPUs in terms of price, features, and performance? Alex?
This is such a hard question. I'm not very good in very long-term thinking. Honestly, I guess, so you got your niche, a slight niche already where NVIDIA is kind of about like features and like brand prestige and less price performance, where you have AMD, which is more about price performance in the low to mid-range for sure. And then Intel would have to come up maybe with its own niche and or carve out some of the things that I think it's more like Intel's more of an NVIDIA competitor in that aspect in the long term because it's got this really rocky start where it's like it has good price performance right now, but it's also like with all these caveats. So I think what Intel is going to do over the long term is try and take NVIDIA customers, which is like a larger portion of the market. AMD, I think it's a little bit harder to wrestle away the AMD customers at that point, actually, oddly enough. So that's kind of what I see. I don't know. How do you see this, John?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you on that. It is interesting though just to have more than two GPU manufacturers on the market again, because that kind
Yeah.
of takes us back to the 90s, which was my favorite period for 3D accelerator cards when every company was attempting something. There were so many. Uh, who remembers the Ticket to Ride? No,
No, I
there,
don't.
there, I exactly. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess the main thing that seems to meaningfully differentiate currently just seems to be, as he says, the price, features, and performance. Like Intel's targeting a very different market than Nvidia right now, right? But you can get those Arc GPUs for a lot less. AMD's kind of occupying the middle slot with up to pretty high end performance at the top end, and then Nvidia seems to be really focusing on pushing things to the next level. So they're all kind of doing slightly different things. It feels like, which is cool.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, the GPU market is so big and it goes beyond gaming.
Oh
There's
yeah,
the
that's true.
enterprise element as well. I think the main, one of the big drivers for Intel to actually do this is the enterprise market, because they sell a lot of Xeons, right? And why not sell to the same customers an all-in-one solution that has Intel GPUs rather than those same customers just going straight out to Nvidia to get whatever card, whatever Tesla card or whatever it is these days they sell to that particular market. So I think there's a much wider consideration as to where these GPUs are being sold and why they're being created in the first place. Is it sustainable? Absolutely. Let's make it, let's expand it out still further. What would happen if you gave NVIDIA an x86 license? I think there'd be exciting things happening in the CPU market, even more than there are now, right?
Yeah,
More competition produces more innovation. And in actual fact, an NVIDIA APU with an x86 cluster, I think that would be like pretty awesome. But for whatever reason, that can't happen. But in the graphics space, you know, it's everything to play for, and I think that's what Intel is excited about and why they want to get into it. But they've got a long way to go. I mean, I think we've kind of mentioned in the review that the silicon is big. It's seemingly quite inefficient in terms of the performance that they're getting out of it. Transistor counts are large. Ultimately, the chip is like pretty big. It's much bigger than the PS5 chip that's now on the same process, and it's offering vaguely similar broad ballpark raster performance. You know, so it's early days for us to even consider the long term implications there. Sustainable in the long term, I think so. I do think it might actually be a driver also for more convergence in features. Now we've got, for example, FSR2. FSR, let's assume that machine learning is coming to AMD. I'm pretty sure there'll be an FSR3. We've got DLSS2, we've got DLSS3, we've got XeSS. There's got to be some kind of convergence on this to stop the segmentation in the market. Although I think from Nvidia's perspective, they're kind of sitting pretty, and they can push out DLSS, and it's great for them. But for the market as a whole, I think that's probably slightly problematic in terms of take up. Um, how can they meaningfully differentiate their GPUs in terms of price, features, and performance? Well, price, there's no captive market. There wouldn't be a captive market if the products are all of equal value, right? It would be a much more aggressive pricing. Features that, well, I mm, Nvidia invests so much in features, so much. Intel are trying to catch up there. But we're in this the situation now where DLSS2 is like 2 years old, over 2 years old, and other vendors are still catching up to that. Now we've got DLSS3, early days there, glitches in the matrix to resolve there, but they've laid down the marker. Now, if you saw our Intel interview with Tom Peterson, he spent a lot of time talking about frame generation, bearing in mind their Intel GPUs don't have it. So, Occam's razor suggests they're working on it. So, it's all about driving the market onwards and competition. I just think it's a really good thing. The only sustainability side of things, which I think is potentially questionable, is Intel have got a long way to go, right? A long way to go. And they've got to be in it for the long haul for this to actually pay out. But yeah, interesting stuff. Let's move on to the next question. We've got, wow, we've got so many and we're running out of time. This one is quite interesting. Alex, when Crysis was released in 2007, the most powerful GPU on the market, 8800 Ultra, had 400 gigaflops of compute. The 4090 is 80 teraflops. Do you think the visuals of modern games feel 200 times better than Crysis?
Well, just as like to encapsulate discussion, or frame it is actually the word. Like when you get closer to some nth degree eventuality, like there's an asymptotic slope. Diminishing returns is a real thing, but it's not the way people always use it. Like technically, as you get closer to reality, that halfway step, getting close to reality, is always a little bit smaller. So yes, it is not 200 times better than Crysis, but it is a lot better than Crysis, and it's going to depend on where you're looking in a game. So if you look outside in Crysis in like the jungle, it's actually a lot closer to like modern games. It doesn't look too much different or so much worse. Crysis like spent all of its time trying to make that look good, and it has failures elsewhere, or detrimental visual features elsewhere, because they focused on this aspect of the game so much and what the tech could do at the time. So if you look at like an indoor scene, for example, in Crysis, like in the caves, that like looks so much better in modern games. Take a look at the cave section in Crysis and compare it with the UE5, like the original UE5 demo of Lumen in the Land of Nanite, or whatever it's called. That looks way, way better on every aspect. And everyone who worked on Crysis would say the same thing. So I think there's some areas where we've seen more stagnation, just due to technical things and just what games are focusing on. And then there's other areas nowadays which look so much better. So it's like this.
Okay. Next question from Fatal Media. Wow. John question. How do you envisage LG's future LG OLED TV tech evolving to accommodate the power of the 4090, e.g. 4K 240 Hz? Interesting question, right? But does a TV need 240 Hz? It's not really too concerned about the existence of the RTX 4090, is it?
Yeah, I don't think LG's TVs are going to evolve in any significant way to support really high frame rates like that, because that's not what the market's about. It's more, the TV space is about matching up to the HDMI 2.1 sort of ceiling. So I don't think we're going to see beyond that necessarily, but in the monitor space, who knows? We're starting to see more with OLED monitors now, I think. So I think the way that they will continue to evolve is just further improving the panel by, you know, overcoming things like ABL and you know, the peak brightness stuff. Sony's have you guys seen this newer Sony TVs using the QD OLED technology, the quantum dots?
Not in person.
That stuff looks,
no.
There is a noticeable boost in overall brightness and less extreme ABL when putting a super bright screen on the scene. It's definitely noticeable.
What is ABL? Can you say that, John?
Auto brightness limiter. It's like if, let's say you're in Windows and you have a notepad document open in a little window and then you maximize it, you'll see the whole screen kind of dim.
Yes, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the, you know, they're working towards improving things to reduce things like that. Also putting in heat sinks on there to help support higher temperatures, which allows for higher brightness. You know, things like that I think will change, but I would like to see some actual PC monitors that support, you know, really high refresh rates using OLED technology. I don't know if LG would deliver that. I don't think they've actually even done an OLED monitor yet. I'm pretty sure they have not.
Yeah, maybe not LG. I do think there's going to be higher refresh rate 4K screens, which makes the whole DisplayPort 1.4A thing on the 4090 a bit of a downer, right? I think you mentioned, Alex, that they might just use multiple DP ports.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how serious I was about that, but I thought about it afterwards, and I'm thinking like, yeah, man, I used to have a monitor that required 2 DVI.
Dual link.
Why
haven't we seen that in a while? I don't know why, actually.
Well, the first 4K screen I had required 2 DisplayPort inputs. It was basically literally two two sort of
separate
images
monitors.
side by side. Yeah, it's kind of wacky. But yeah, interesting stuff there. But yeah, it's not so much the TV side of things that will evolve, but certainly the monitor side. But where that goes, who knows? Final question here, and got unfinished business, John. Todd Weitzel asks, it's not a question as such. Let's John deliver a Stadia eulogy since we were robbed a contemporaneous one by illness. You weren't here for DF Direct where we discussed the death of Stadia. So are you interested in delivering a eulogy?
Well, I can try my best. Stadia, I never really liked the concept of you. Now you've joined your friends with OnLive and the like. When Stadia was first revealed, they had the Sega Dreamcast, the ET cartridge for the Atari 2600, and the Power Glove sitting on a pedestal. And then they had a fourth pedestal with nothing on it that was considered Stadia. And that is the form it now returns to, nothing. But at the same time, the more I think about this, you look at a service like Stadia and you start to see that there were actually developers that were relying on the revenue that could be generated from Stadia, specifically those that were creating games. Google's payouts were apparently pretty darn good. And unfortunately now some developers are suffering because of this sudden shutdown. So I feel bad for the business side of things on there. But at the same time, I am happy to see that consumers have once again rejected streaming as like the main delivery format for games, right? So, this just kind of goes with it. I'm actually a little bit surprised it shut down as quickly as it did, though, to be honest. I figured it would hang on for at least another couple of years. But the unceremonious way that it kind of went out is a little bit surprising. And it seems like even people inside Google didn't really know that this was happening. They were still implementing features right up to the end. Mm-hmm. And then, just bam, it's over. I will say this, at this point, I think it's fair to say that if you're launching a new platform, you probably don't want Phil Harrison at the helm.
Well, Phil's getting a lot of grief, right? And it is true that he has been associated now with a string of failures. But, I remember when Sony in the UK was run out of his bedroom, essentially. And PS1, PS2... nobody seems to want to talk about Phil's input into those big successes.
He did great work back then, absolutely. It's just he never really managed to find success necessarily after that in a big way. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily the fault of one man, of course, but
Fair enough. Okay, well that's it. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those notionally instant notifications as usual. No guarantees. That is by disclaimer. DF Supporter Program. Wow, so much has happened this week on the DF Supporter Program. Let's quickly talk about that. We put out a 4K 120Hz video of DLSS 3 in action. So if you've got a 120Hz screen, you don't need to spend £1,600 or dollars on a GPU to see how it works. You can join the DF Supporter Program. From that, I actually split it out into a generated frames versus... standard frames comparison, which is quite intriguing. It works. It looks all right. And what else? Wow, tons of early access. The call for questions on Patreon, of course. And as usual, there's just so much happening on our Discord server. It is the place to be if you enjoy our content and just gaming technology in general. But that's the end of the pitch and the end of the show. And DF Direct Weekly will return, as the name suggests, next week. But in the meantime, thanks for watching.